Fire Away tackles burning questions and hot topics in Canadian employment law, human resources, and dispute resolution. Hosted by Rudner Law, Fire Away is your go-to source for legal insight on the world of work. So whether you are an employee or an employer, a lawyer or an HR pro, let's ignite the conversation and get into today's episode. Here's your host, employment lawyer, mediator, and founder of Rudner Law, Stuart Rudner.
Welcome to episode 94 of Fire Away. I am thinking of today's show as kind of like an FAQ. I really want to talk about some of the common questions that come up, especially for smaller business owners that they might have about HR and HR law issues. Also bigger picture questions like how do you protect yourself as a business owner while still attracting and retaining top talent. I am very excited today that both of my guests are people that I've known for quite a long time and have tremendous respect for. So I'm joined by both Jill Bartley and Ryan Ellis. So by way of background, Jill is a global leader with deep expertise in strategic operations, leadership development, and organizational transformation. She's currently the Senior Director of Strategic Operations at Water First, a Canadian nonprofit dedicated to addressing water challenges in Indigenous communities. Previously, Jill was the COO at Hope and Healing International, which is where you were when we first met. And she led complex operational initiatives supporting global health and community development. She's got a strong background as an HR professional. She's led international teams. She's implemented scalable systems and fostered cultures of accountability and innovation. And what I would add to what's on your official bio, Jill, is you have been a member of the faculty of my advanced HR law for HR professionals course, senior HR professionals course, ever since we started the course many years ago now. And Jill comes in every year for one of our fireside chats, where basically we invite the students to ask anything. And one of the reasons I love Jill for that course and for this show today is I know you can answer just about any question, and you take a very pragmatic but also compassionate approach to HR. So really excited to have you on the show today, Jill. And then Ryan Ellis is my other guest. Ryan, I haven't known you quite as long as Jill, but it's been a long time. I know Ryan as the membership director of Tech Connects, which is a great organization I've been part of for many years. Ryan is passionate about the importance of associations and the success of small and medium-sized technology companies in Ontario. I'll challenge what it says in your bio and say it's not just technology companies, but pretty much any companies, given the people I see at the Tech Connects meetings. And I love the fact that your bio, Ryan, says you are an educator, a connector, a bike, ski, and comic enthusiast. So we'll see how the conversation goes. We can talk about that as well. But I also think of you as kind of, we have so many great sessions through Tech Connects, and you hear what people are talking about. And so I think of you as speaking on behalf of the smaller business owner because you hear about what they're talking about and what their concerns are. So I think it's going to be a great discussion. Jill, Ryan, thanks both for being guests on Fire Away.
Glad to be here. It's really great, Stuart, to spend this time talking about these HR subjects. I just think they're important to us as individuals and as employees and as employers. So it's nice to be here with you.
Yeah, same sentiment. I'm happy to be here with yourself, Stuart, and Jill. And I look forward to the discussion. And I think it's going to be a good one.
Yeah, I think it's going to be great. And, I'm coming at this from the perspective, I keep saying this lately because I'm just amazed by the fact that I've been practicing employment law for over 25 years. And over the course of those years, I've worked with obviously a lot of organizations, some very large, but a lot of them are smaller, mid-sized businesses. And although I'm often working with HR or other professionals, sometimes it's, the business owner themselves. And they often struggle when our firm, we try to help them protect themselves and we remind them to treat their employment relationships as legal relationships. I'm sure everyone's heard me say that a million times. And I get pushback from people who say things like, I've been doing this for 30 years and we never need anything more than a handshake. And now you want me to give all of my employees these 10 or 12 page contracts. So it's all, part of the biggest challenge is finding the right balance. And so I'll start with a pretty broad question, which is, what are the practical steps that a smaller business owner should be taking today to protect themselves, but also supporting their employees? Jill, I'll start with you.
For sure. And I think it's important and to remember that an employment relationship is at its heart a relationship. And like every relationship, the best thing you can do is to start off well. And so I always tell employers to focus on the contract, the agreement that you bring people into your organizations on, the expectations you start at the beginning, the orientation process that you provide to them, which sets your standards. And then it's easy to come back to those standards. If it's something they've heard before, it's easy to come back to it or to be able to refer back to it if you've done it well in the beginning. If you don't do it well and you're playing cleanup and expectations have gone completely amok, that's harder. It's harder to get back to kind of the common ground that if you have never established that. So, I think the most important thing is how you bring people into the organization on what terms. And that really refers to the contract. What is that agreement?
And just before I let you jump in, Ryan, so I love the fact that you're focusing on the relationship part of the expression, and we tend to focus on the legal part of the expression. But how do you balance that? And contracts are probably the best example. I think, I often say this to people. We could draft the most ironclad, strongest contract that will protect the employer as best as is legally possible. But no smart employee would sign that because it would be so one-sided. So how do you find the right balance where you want to have a good contract, protect the company, but also not turn people off before they even start?
Yeah, I think that you really have to, look at that kind of what is fair. And, you have to understand that contracts are absolutely intended to protect the employer. They're trying to set limits on what common law will provide to the employee. And so, I think you just have to be really honest, but you have to remember that you have to be fair. If you're overreaching, your contract will run into trouble and it'll be invalid and unenforceable, and you have to be able to consistently apply it to your people. So if you don't want to run a military establishment, you can't have a militaristic contract. So it is finding that balance and that path, and being open and honest with people right for the beginning of these are the things that are really important, so we're going to outline them, and then let's have good conversations along the way.
Yeah, I love that. It gets back to the point you're making, which is communication and managing expectations starts with the contract. And one of the points we always make is that sometimes people assume that we tell them to put a contract in place and it'll be so one-sided, but it doesn't have to be oppressive. It's just establishing expectations and setting the rules, whatever they might be. So yeah, it doesn't have to put somebody on the defensive right away. Ryan, I think I cut you off first there. Do you want to
Yeah,
jump
no,
in?
all good. I was just, yeah, one of the points Joe made was like, if I think first impressions is the most, and yeah, like even just down to the description of the job offer. If I'm expecting ABC and I walk into DEF, I'm like already we're not working at the same level. Like I feel like I've been undermined, or whomever is applying for this job has got the job, and we're already starting off on a bad note. And to me, it's like, have I made a mistake? And what is this company doing? Is this the right fit? Should I tag along for a little bit, see what happens, see if we can work some things out and we can get to a point where we both are agreeing. But at the end of the day, if I end up leaving on bad terms, it doesn't look good on the employer. And they have to come find somebody to replace me and go through the same process. And by way of, the way humans communicate, the tribal knowledge, I've already let you two know. And if we're in the same wheelhouse of friends, I've already said XYZ, I just got messed over. I would not suggest doing any business or working with this company until they get some stuff in order. So I think that's like, back to Joe, clear, concise communication, a nice balance. Obviously, don't want to be militaristic, but finding that a nice stepping stone to work together, and having a very smooth and work transitioning and working with the new employee, and then the employee working with the employers.
Yeah, I think it makes great sense, and a lot of it sounds like it should be common sense, but it doesn't always play out that way. So, I think that's helpful. I guess changing gears a little bit, one of the questions that often comes up is something along the lines of, how do businesses navigate changing laws, changing legislation, changing practices without, creating unnecessary risk? And I guess part of that is, when do you need to have HR as part of the company, either in-house or external? So it might be the next question. And Jill, maybe you can jump in first. What HR support should small businesses be considering, and when?
Yeah, so I think, it's I always kind of align it a little bit with joint health and safety, and what are the guidelines for that? So, you have to start thinking about it when you have one employee, right? So you have to start wading into the world of HR with one employee. When do you need to have somebody supporting you to kind of build your foundations? It's probably like the same, like about 5 employees. You really need to start putting in place some things that will make their employment experience common to them all. Otherwise, you get, people that are hired at different times are hired kind of almost in different cultures. Maybe they worked for the founder and everything was kind of decided over a coffee cup, and that's great. But then all of a sudden you've got a culture of people who are outside that circle and inside the circle. And the new person may not have access to the founder after about 5 people because they don't have time for this. So I think it depends a little bit on the nature of the business. But I think that, as soon as you have an employee, you have to wade into the world of HR. And then I think from then on, you've got to think about what you're trying to build and what you're trying to grow, and, get some of the building blocks in place as you go. It doesn't have to be complicated. You can add to it as you get bigger, but foundationally, I think you need to start setting the stage for what you want the employment experience to be like for the first 50 employees.
Hmm. Yeah, makes sense. Ryan, did you want to add to
Yeah,
that?
I'm just trying to think of from the perspective of somebody who's starting out a business. It's like what would trigger, like how would somebody get triggered to start in like going down like a proper HR route? And because sometimes I feel like the companies that are in our peripheral, it's time management, and it's like, how much time do I need to put in HR? Everybody seems to be doing their work. Everything is kind of hunky dory, but obviously, it takes one bad apple to ruin the bunch. But um, like how do we get it ingrained early that HR is a very important practice? And like Jill said, from like for first employee, you got to already start thinking ahead. And I gotta say, obviously, it's about strategic planning and like 1, 3, 5 years and more. But it's kind of, I don't know if it's always top of mind with people starting out with businesses, because obviously we're in some interesting times business wise, and people are just trying to stay afloat and trying to make as much money to grow. And it's like ingraining how do we get HR as a important business function, because good quality HR means like there is success. Good things can happen out of this. But it's like it's getting to that early stage is how do we get this going from the beginning and not putting it back and pushing it back, kind of like the importance of insurance and things like that.
Jill, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, I think unfortunately human nature is we act as a result of a bee sting, right? So, they tend to think the way it is going to remain the way it is until something goes wrong. So as humans, we learn from mistakes and trial and error. So I generally find the first experience I hear of people having with HR is because they have an HR problem. They have something that's changed and something they need to address. And it can be anything. It can be a hire that hasn't worked out and they don't know what to do about it. They can be bumping into, any type of a performance issue. Some of the things we've seen lately are, you're working at home in COVID, and all of a sudden you find out people are working multiple jobs, and dealing with some of this stuff. They were fine when they were coming into the office, but now that people are working at home, there's been a divergent in what they're doing with their time. And so, just that's what changes. And and that's what generally drags people into the world of HR. But it would be easier on them, I think, and on their staff if they thought about it earlier.
Yeah, I love your bee sting analogy, but and Ryan, your insurance analogy. Like I've used both of those over the years, and getting back to the business owner who says, "Well, we've operated on handshakes for 30 years," and yeah, that's great, and everything is perfectly fine until you get the one bad apple, and you get the first wrongful dismissal claim, and then they realize A, why they need contracts, and B, why they need HR. But I know one of the biggest issues, and Ryan, you probably hear this more than I do, just within the Tech Connects world, is cost. People are just, what's hiring an HR professional going to cost me, or if I have to do some sort of fractional arrangement, they're often worried about that. And the insurance analogy is often, it often resonates. But what else would you say to someone who says, I'll just take my chances because I don't have the money to pay someone to do this now?
Yeah, it's a slippery slope. Definitely a slippery slope. Um, it's probably better to put a little bit of money and effort, even if it might not be perfect. Something is better than nothing, and you know, grow from there. But yeah, like a lot of conversations because a lot of our members and a lot of like Ontario businesses and Canadian business, small to medium sized businesses, are kind of in that maybe that 5 to 20 mark. I know the number differentiates, but like yeah, like in if a small business, like we're fighting for every dollar. And like back to right now with the economy and things are not you know things could be great in some sectors. Some sectors are being hit hard. So there's, um, a lot of uncertainties. So people are going to be probably keeping the checkbooks a little bit closer right now. But, a lot of companies have succeeded in the past, like when there's been turmoil and other things, sometimes it's still better to keep spending and, because you never know when it's going to break. So, um, if it's not going to be 100% perfect, at least do something.
Yeah. And actually, you touched on another thing which is coming up lately, which is the uncertain times that we're in. And, I mean, Ryan, you've heard me, I've done some sessions with Tech Connects and elsewhere about, what to do when you're considering trying to reduce labor costs. But I mean, maybe I'll flip it back to you, Jill. I mean, if you had a business owner who's worried about where things are going, perhaps their revenues are down, they're looking to cut labor costs. We're trying to decide how to phrase the question. I was going to either say, what are the most common mistakes you see, or where do you suggest I go first? So I'll let you choose which question you want to answer.
Yeah, I think you have to really be able to look at contribution, based on roles. So, some of the things that HR services can help you to do is to kind of assess the value add of employees. And sometimes the value add is in their role, and sometimes their value add is they're indirect. They're really great. They're great at their job, but they also are great at something else. And so, they become highly valuable employees. And so it's really important to have kind of that objective view of who you have on staff and what are their capabilities as you want to reduce in size, because you want people that have the capacity to kind of straddle wider, right? To reach wider, to cover and expand their duties. So either they're positioned for growth, or they can, they have outside, competencies that can be tapped to get you through these tough times. One of the other really important things is, the capabilities of your managers, right? And so the thing that I've found HR really helps is in getting managers to have real conversations with their employees. And managers don't like to have real conversations with their employees. They love to talk about work and tasks. They hate to talk about performance. And so, that structure of HR will help them to highlight in the ways that this employee's performance is helping the organization or contributing to the organization, and ways in which, it may not be adding as much value or maybe detracting. And so with those ongoing conversations, you become in a better position to realize where your organizational assets are in your people. And they're valuable just like a piece of machinery or something else. And so you need to, you want to manage the relationship. I'm highly relational. I think that's really important, but don't want to lose track of the asset. And in a lot of organizations, their biggest asset, their biggest, payroll is their number one expense. in a lot of situations. And so, they have to be aware of that. They have to be tracking that and keeping, is that asset becoming more valuable or less, over time.
One thing the Jill, that you just said, the performance. I remember many years ago when we used to get evaluated, like it was like once a year, and it was almost very like immature of some of the stuff. It was more like, we just have an hour to talk about whatever you want to talk about, and we never really got down to the nuts and bolts of, yes, this is why you're a good employee, and then we love the fact you do. But there's obviously some other ways that you can improve. Like I feel like I never really got like a proper it was never properly done. But then I feel like in the last 6 to 7 years, maybe even within a decade, and maybe Stu, one day you should have Pete Needham on your show.
Yeah.
It's become really, really important because not everybody thrives off the money part of being successful. And Jill, and I know, as working in associations, we don't work for money.
No.
I work for the betterment of our members, the people within those companies, the location, York region. And when I see people succeeding and growing and landed a deal, or something really awesome has happened, the fact that I'm on the show with Stuart today, this is what gets me going. The success of our golf day last week. And I feel like some of the stuff with DEI and mindfulness, I feel like it's come a long way. But back in the day, I really wish that the performance stuff I guess there was a better approach, because I think a lot of people were just like, managers were afraid to have conflict because we always take things personally, and I don't know if they were even managed to like how they would manage dealing with people when if I was told something that I disagreed with, like, okay, I just got mad at my manager. Is this going to affect me going down the road? Like, did I just put myself up on the chopping block? And so I think we've come a long way, but yeah, I think there's still more work to be done. But yeah, an interesting thing that you brought up, Jill.
Yeah, and I think culture and cause is incredibly important. I think it's a huge motivator, and I've been fortunate to work for causes that I felt deeply passionate about, and so it makes you very driven in doing that. But I talked to my husband. He's a car salesman. He says, you're so lucky to have this, meaningful work. And it is meaningful. I said, but your work's meaningful too. You help families achieve their dreams. Like if driving around and being able to do things that they want to do and helping them to find a path. So we have to help that. With our employees, to give them passion in their work, but also to be able to define our performance expectations, which managers really sometimes stink at. I expect this, and I always use decision making. I would say, okay, you're a 2 in decision making, and the employee is like, what does that mean? I don't make enough decisions. I should make more decisions. I should make less decisions. I should make more decisions by myself. I should involve more people in my decisions. Like, until you become a manager through practice of being able to describe what it is your expectations are, and rather than saying you're not very good at, and saying, this is how I see you, this is how I see you performing, and here are the gaps, and that takes effort. So I think HR can be really supportive of that, and that process, and building that capacity in there. But I think these things have to be built into their systems. Like, I think we have to, through the constructing of an HR strategy and HR tools and systems, be able to kind of build this alignment around this process and the expectations around this process. So it is, experience. People anticipate, they don't fear. I've had managers often say to me, they hate performance appraisals, they hate giving them. I love them. I love getting them, and I love giving them. And I love redoing my managers when I tell them that they go wrong. But that's you've got to work with people to feel comfortable in that zone, in that feedback zone, and say, feedback is a gift. It really is,
Yeah, but but it's so often the managers don't do it well. And it's interesting because both of you have touched on this point. And I've said this many times over the years. It's like so much of the reason that employment law firms like ours are busy is because you have people who are put in management positions, but they're never trained to manage people. They're never trained to have the difficult conversations. They avoid conflict, as you guys have both said in different ways. And I won't. I'll give a quick example, and you guys may have heard me say this before, and I may have even said it on a previous episode before. But this was early on in my career, and I just remember that we had a corporate client, and they finally reached out to us because they were going to let somebody go because he was just chronically late for work, and it had been going on for years and years. It wasn't getting better, so they were just ready to give up on this guy and let him go. And fortunately, we encouraged them to call him in and have a discussion with him. And and I should add that when we were initially contacted, the manager, his supervisor said, "I've talked to him over and over and over again. He still doesn't come in on time." That was the message. But what really happened, as this guy explained to the manager's manager, was that yeah, he acknowledged he would come in a few minutes late a lot because his bus often ran late. But what his manager would do, he wouldn't call him into his office and have a direct conversation. What his manager would do would be to kind of wait until they bump into each other in the kitchen getting coffee. And while they're having their idle chit chat, he would say something like, I noticed you were late again today. It'd be great if you could come in on time. But that was the extent of it. There was no indication that it was a serious issue, no indication that there would be consequences. And as this guy said when he was called in, fortunately, before he was let go, if I knew it was an issue, I would make sure to be on time. But the problem was his manager was never trained. This was someone who had been part of the group and then promoted out of it. So he still felt like he was more like part of the group than the manager. And so he just could not have those conversations, which I guess brings us back to having HR, having procedures and training to avoid issues like that and more serious ones.
Yeah, and if you structure things well at the start and use resources like people who have expertise in HR law, then I think, especially when you're a small entity and you're a one-of entity, it's a good checkpoint to make sure you stay kind of grounded in where you should be in terms of the balance of what the law says we have to do now versus what the employer might like to do.
Yeah, no, and I think the other point that's kind of come up is it's just having having those resources available. I mean, we used to say have these people on your Rolodex. That's kind of an outdated concept now, but having HR if they're not internal, having an HR lawyer, having your accountant, having all those people that you need to guide you is critical. And then actually talking to them before you make decisions, which is the other reason that our firm is so busy, is because most people don't do it the opposite way. They make the decision and then they contact their lawyer if things go sideways. And at that point, of course, it ends up usually costing them a lot more to fix it than it would have just to be more proactive. So speaking of being proactive, I'm looking and seeing we're almost a half an hour already, which is amazing how fast the time goes. So, is there maybe I'll turn to you, Jill, first. Another sort of common issue or something else that you'd want to focus on? We're talking about what small business owners should be doing.
I think the other thing to do is to reassure small business owners that there is lots they can do, because I think it can be fairly intimidating when they start exploring HR law and they hear all the things they shouldn't do or can't do. And to get back to kind of where we started, you need to have a respectful relationship. It doesn't mean that you can't take steps to correct performance, to end an employment relationship, or to make changes within your organization. You don't need to be in fear of your workforce. You need to be informed, and you need to act, kind of methodically towards those goals, and be open and transparent about, what you're trying to achieve. So that's where I think, getting advice from a lawyer about what you want to achieve, what is your end game, as you've often said to me as we have these conversations, it really helps you in kind of feeling more confident in your role, whether it's a CEO or a new manager or some other level in between.
Yeah, I agree. 100% communication. And just like your story, Stuart, yeah, like things could have changed very easily. Find out why he's late. What can we do as a company to maybe help? Who's driving that way? Can somebody, can we carpool? Like small little incremental things could have led to probably a way better decision, and that person could have been employed, and I don't know all the circumstances, but you know, and just instead of just, hey, show up on time, like it's so laissez-faire, and it's like if he didn't know, he didn't know, and then, but there's also sends a bad tone, you know, if somebody's been let go, and who else is next? If people are going to be on edge, it's like, okay, what do I need to do? Like, okay, we need to have these conversations, and then maybe it is one person, that gets released. That was a big part of a company that maybe is what ignites a proper HR, forum or discussions to take place because maybe somebody's lost a very valuable member and they were maybe the heart and soul of a company. And then now everybody is up in arms and mad at management. And it's like, what could we have done different to save whomever? Um, but yeah, even just like marriage, communication, communication, communication. Because yeah, you don't want to break down because it could leave a bad taste in your mouth. So another thing. So yeah, I agree
And distrust is expensive.
yeah, and it's cheap. It's free. It's free. Talking doesn't cost anything.
You both have given us some great quotes, which will undoubtedly Mark will turn into small short clips that we're going to use. But those are great. But it's so true. Like everything you said is so true. And I always, I train all of our lawyers that when we're working with clients. Obviously, we're giving legal advice, but you can't just look at the legalities. You've got to look at the practical relationships, of the practical aspects of whatever is happening. And to your point about communication and just treating everyone fairly and respectfully. And I've seen it, and I'm sure you guys both have as well. Even someone who's let go, if they're treated fairly, respectfully, they can leave with very positive feelings about the organization. And it also doesn't create that situation like you're describing, Ryan, where everyone is now wondering, am I next? Because everyone is comfortable that the company is treating people fairly. So you can protect yourself, but still also treat people well, which can lead to you being an employer of choice, which at the end of the day is what everybody wants. So before I wrap things up, and thank you guys again, if people wanted to find you guys and reach out either with questions or comments or anything else, what's the best way to find you? I guess maybe Ryan, you can go first.
Yeah, obviously techconnects.ca. Yeah, we're a not-for-profit tech business focused association. So in my bio, I guess I should probably do a little tweak. Yeah, can we find I do most of my social media through LinkedIn, and kind of live, breathe Tech Connects. And we're into our 44th year of existence. So yeah, we've seen a lot of changes, and pretty much now we pretty much see everybody as a tech company to some degree. And yeah, if you're not building it, your people are utilizing it. And yeah, a pleasure to meet you, Jill, and we'll see you around town. And as always, Stu, thanks so much for your support, and happy to be a part of your podcast today.
I really appreciate you doing it. So 44 years, and I think you guys said 25 years without rain at the golf tournament. Is that right?
We went 15, yeah, 15 years.
15
So,
years. It's still pretty impressive. Although last week, I'm not sure you could have cut it any closer since it was still raining as we were having breakfast before tee off.
yeah, so still counts.
Everyone got the round in. We didn't get wet, so
Yeah.
it definitely does. So yeah, thank you. And Jill, what about you? How can people find you?
Yeah, so people can certainly find me on LinkedIn, and happy to connect with people and send me a message and I'll get back to you. And yeah, I'm just spending my days now working for Water First. It's an incredible organization working with indigenous communities to address local water challenges and to ensure that everyone living in this place many call Canada have access to clean drinking water, which is something I think we can all get around in a hurry. So yeah, no, it's a pleasure to be here. Pleasure to meet you, Ryan, and to Stuart. Always great to connect with you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jill. You guys were both great. And that's a wrap on episode 94. So first of all, or second of all, since I've already said it, but thank you again to Jill and Ryan. You guys were both great guests. It was a great discussion that flew by, but I appreciate you guys doing it. Thanks as always to our production team for putting everything together. And of course, thanks to all of you guys for watching or listening. Please, if you're enjoying it, subscribe and like our podcast on our YouTube channel, and check out all of Rudner Law's social media to keep up to date on employment law matters, and sign up for our newsletter. And last but not least, to quote my favorite hockey broadcaster, the pleasure was all ours.
At Rudner Law, we want people to treat their employment relationships as legal relationships and make informed decisions rather than assumptions. Keep up to date on Canadian employment law issues by following us on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and TikTok, liking our Facebook page, subscribing to our YouTube channel, and signing up for our newsletter. Past episodes can be found on YouTube, on our website, and archived on Facebook. And if you like our page or subscribe to our channel, you will receive notifications when the episodes are live. As we always say, none of that replaces legal advice tailored to your specific circumstances. If you think you might need an employment lawyer, you probably do. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us.